Hello YouTube. So I recently uploaded a video on phenomenal conservatism, and I thought it might be worth just briefly going over some of my own reservations about that position. Phenomenal conservatism is the view that if it seems to be the case that P, then in the absence of defeaters, you have some justification for believing that P. I've I've just done a video outlining it, so if you want to know the sort of standard debate, then you can go and watch that. What do I think about this? Well, there's a few things that trouble me about phenomenal conservatism. First of all, there's the question of, well, what exactly are seemings? What are seemings, right? So the standard kind of line will be, look, seemings are not beliefs, they're not dispositions to believe. Instead, seemings are kinds of appearances or experiences, and these appearances might incline us to believe particular things, but they're not themselves beliefs. Now, I take it that seemings are this is a notion that is kind of drawn from folk psychology, but it's a particularly vague and ambiguous part of folk psychology. Most people have got a reasonably well-rounded understanding of what a belief is, of what a desire is, of what it is to be in pain. Of course, there are lots of conceptual challenges with working out those ideas precisely, but again, this is just something that most people are going to have a grasp of those things. But when it comes to seemings, what is a seeming? That's something about which I at least feel somewhat in the dark. At the very least, I think it's fair to say that when we talk about seemings, we are grouping together a whole host of different types of state. I can say that it seems to be the case that I have hands, and that's based on a kind of visual appearance, a perceptual experience, and that's very different from a memory, right? I can. So it seems to be the case that I have hands, and I also remember that I have hands. But of course, the memory is that's just a different kind of thing. It feels very different to remember the hands that I had yesterday versus seeing my hands now. And all of that is again very different from an intellectual intuition or something along those lines. And we can, broadly speaking, we can say okay, it seems so. In all of these cases, we can talk about seemings. It seems to be the case that I perceive hands. It seems to be the case that I remember hands. It seems to be the case that 1 + 1 = 2, or that slavery is wrong, or whatever. But I mean, the differences between these states are obvious, right? And given all of these obvious differences, and given the just the sort of general problems with folk psychology, as a theory, I'm somewhat suspicious of just treating this as as sort of saying, okay, seemings provide justification just across the board, because yes, all of these states do have something in common, right? I mean, I guess otherwise we wouldn't be inclined to call them all seemings, but there are many differences. So that's just a sort of general kind of background concern, is like a suspicion of seemings talk. I actually kind of worry that when we talk about seemings, there's maybe a kind of reification going on. So it's not obvious that there is any particular state, that there is a thing that is a seeming, versus it just being a useful kind of tool of our language. Again, I'm just not sure, right? So this is one concern I have. But then I think that there are more specific problems where there seem to be cases, yes, there seem to be cases of seeming statements that I guess, maybe conflict in such a way that it's unclear what the seeming is supposed to be. So here's an example. Consider, for instance, morality. Obviously, one of the areas where phenomenal conservatism is applied is in metaethics. It's often used to defend moral realism. So it seems to me that slavery is wrong, right? It seems to be the case that slavery is wrong. And I hope that it seems to you that slavery is wrong. So we all sort of share, hopefully we all share this seeming. And so phenomenal conservatism says, okay, well, in that case, I thereby have some justification for believing that slavery is wrong. Okay, but now consider this proposition. The proposition that slavery is wrong is true. Well, that doesn't seem to me to be the case. That seems... so that claim, the claim that slavery is wrong is true, that seems to me to be false. Or consider, it is a fact that slavery is wrong. That seems to me to be false. So, and I should be clear, I want to clarify as well that when I say that those statements seem to me to be false, that's not the product of rational argument. It's like, that's just a kind of brute intuition. Like and I've always had that intuition. As long as I've been thinking about morality, I've always had anti-realist intuitions. Even before I got into philosophy, I've always had anti-realist intuitions. And the way that manifests is that, if you say, for instance, like, it is a fact that slavery is wrong, I'm inclined, like, just my initial inclination is just to be like, wait, what? What the hell? Like, no, of course it isn't. Now, actually, interestingly, on the basis of philosophical argument, I have become, I can kind of reason my way to being more sympathetic to this, because there are, like, constructivist views of moral facts that would allow even an anti-realist like myself to accept moral facts. So, I don't know, maybe it is a fact that slavery is wrong, or at least maybe there's a way of making sense to that I can accept. But even so, it seems to be the case to me that it's not a fact that slavery is wrong. That's just how it seems. So, okay, so now I'm like, okay, well, what exactly is my seeming with respect to slavery? Like, what's going on? So, like, slavery is wrong. Yeah, that seems to be the case, but it is true that slavery is wrong. No, that doesn't seem to be the case. Nope. That seems to be false. So I, like, now I'm just, so it's like, okay, well, what is the seeming here? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. So, like, with respect to slavery, of course I have the inclination to say slavery is wrong. But then it's not clear to me, like, why would I take that to have any particular relation to, what I should believe or what would justify belief, given that when you take the statement, it is true that slavery is wrong, or it is a fact that slavery is wrong, those seem to be false. And I guess you could look at this in terms of defeaters or something. You could say, well, it seems that slavery is wrong to me, but then I have a defeater for that, or at least a potential defeater for that, because of these other seemings. But then, that's one way you could look at it, but then you could also say that it's just not clear what my seeming is with respect to slavery. So that's I guess one concern here. And another issue that arises with respect to this question of what are seemings is that, for me, insofar as I can make any sense of seeming talk, it strikes me that seemings are very malleable. So let's take, it seems to be the case that I have hands. Right? It seems to me I have hands. Okay, sure, I open my eyes, I have certain visual experiences, and as a result of those experiences, they incline me to say I have hands. But that's something that's very just, it's, again, that can be massaged away. engage in the right kind of thinking, like my experiences are exactly as they would be if I had hands, but of course my experiences are also exactly as they would be if I was currently dreaming, or if I was, under the having some massive illusion that I had hands. And by sort of running through skeptical arguments and so on, I can very easily lose the sense that I have hands. And actually, it's not just by running through skeptical arguments. There's other ways of doing it as well. Like, I can very easily sort of switch the way that I'm thinking about my perception. I can switch from kind of taking it that there's a world of like 3D objects to just treating my visual field as like this 2D plane, right? That's very easy. That's to me at least. Maybe that's not easy for everyone, but for me that's very easy to do. Like, I can just kind of switch it in my head, where instead of it being 3D, it's more like just a screen with a movie being projected on it. And as soon as I do that, it's like suddenly I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'm no longer inclined to think I have hands, or at least maybe I would still say that I have hands, but they're not like 3D objects. They're not the sort of hands that I would usually be inclined to say I have. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe other people are different. Maybe this is something other people can't do. I would have thought most people could do this, though. I mean, I guess this sort of brings me to, like the second concern that I have, which is the role of defeaters. So I guess one way to put this point about the malleability of Seemings is that, maybe what this comes down to is just that I tend to find skeptical arguments in general compelling. So if you take like alternative models of perception, or alternative, views about what might be causing my visual experiences and so on, yeah, I mean, I just tend to find that stuff compelling, and as a result, right, when I think about that stuff, it's as if the seemings that were there in the sort of normal model disappear. So, in general, phenomenal conservatism. So one issue then is, I guess, about like, well, what exactly are the seemings? And there's an issue about why, why I should trust the seemings given how malleable they are. But then second, there's this point about, the role of defeaters. So as I said, I tend to find skeptical arguments compelling. Now, phenomenal conservatism has to allow that there's a role for defeaters. What I would tend to say is we just have like a boatload of defeaters. Maybe this point isn't really so much an objection to phenomenal conservatism. Maybe it's more just an objection to how phenomenal conservatism tends to be used, because phenomenal conservatism tends to be used in the service of anti-skeptical positions. But I tend to take it that skeptical arguments provide extremely powerful defeaters to pretty much all of our seemings. When I run through things like the Humean argument against reason, so what Hume said. So Hume's argument, very very briefly, is that for any proposition, he basically argues you can't be certain of it. You can only have a assessment of its probability, but then that assessment of probability is itself going to be subject, you can't be certain of that. So when you say, for instance, well, I'm going to assign like a 95% probability to some proposition, that assessment of probability is itself something you can't be certain of. And then basically Hume points out that, if you kind of run through this argument, if you're going to end up with like further and further levels of probability assignments, and you very, very quickly, the mind runs into a fog. And if you actually, sit down and and do this, right? If you take some proposition and then you run through Hume's method here, what you will find, or maybe you won't find this, but what I find is he's absolutely right. The mind just runs into a fog, a complete fog, and you know what? It's not just an intellectual argument. You really feel it. Like, you feel it as strongly as you feel that you have hands. At least I do, right? Like, this isn't just, kind of playing around with propositions and coming up with arguments. It's something that you deeply feel, like it moves you. So if you don't know what Hume's argument against reason is, I'll put up a link to that video. So the point is then, I just think that, like, even if I grant that Seemings could provide justification in the absence of defeaters, there are always defeaters. I actually wondered if there might be like a very general argument for there always being defeaters, and I'm not sure if this works, but it's kind of applying Kyle Stanford's unconceived alternatives argument. So basically the argument is what you might call the unexpected defeaters argument. So there might always be unexpected defeaters for our Seemings, but then this very fact is itself a defeater for our Seemings. It already casts doubt on our Seemings. So like I can think about the Seemings that I had in the past, and I can think about all of the different ways in which some of those Seemings were defeated. Seemings can be defeated in so many ways from so many unexpected sources. There's all kinds of reasons I might have to overturn my Seemings. Sometimes Seemings get overturned. Like, so for instance, if I'm, perceiving, or if I seem to perceive something, then that seeming might be overturned by other perceptions. It might be overturned by the testimony of an authority. It might be overturned by just me reasoning through a particular argument. There's all kinds of ways in which Seemings get defeated. And the point is that in the future, like, who knows? Maybe there's going to be some unexpected defeaters are going to emerge in the future. In fact, I should expect that there will be unexpected defeaters emerging in the future. And then thinking about this, it makes me doubt my current Seemings. Again, maybe this is just because I'm more naturally sympathetic to skeptical challengers or something. But so that's the sort of unexpected defeater argument. There might be unexpected defeaters for our Seemings, and that in itself is a defeater for our Seemings. Now, finally, a third point. And again, this third point isn't really so much an objection to phenomenal conservatism as it is an objection to how it is used, how it is applied in debates. I think that many of the appeals to phenomenal conservatism are just dialectically ineffective. So you know what, right? Like, I'm inclined to say, if you want to claim that, like, you have a justified belief and you're going to justify it on the basis of how things seem to you, then, like, fine, right? You've got a bunch of Seemings, and you take those Seemings to provide justification. Okay, whatever. I don't really have a particularly strong objection to this, but in the context of, like, discussing things with an opponent. Obviously you can say, look, my belief is justified. It's justified on the basis of Seemings. Yeah, obviously, everybody takes their own beliefs to be justified. Well, most people do, at least. I don't think there is such a thing as justification, so actually I don't take my beliefs to be justified. But anyway, most people, I guess, take their beliefs to be justified. So in the context of a discussion with an opponent, there's two possibilities, right? Like, So possibility number one is that your opponent has different seemings to you, at least with respect to the thing you're debating about. But in that case, I mean, so as far as phenomenal conservatism is concerned, in that case, there's a stalemate. So again, take debates about moral realism. The realist says, well, look, it seems to be the case that there are these moral facts. Seems to be the case that it's a fact that slavery is wrong. But that doesn't seem to be the case to me. So, in fact, it seems to me to be the case that it is false that it's a fact that slavery is wrong. So, now what? I mean, like I have different seemings to you. So yeah, now what? Now we're in a stalemate. We're gonna have to appeal to something else, I suppose, or at least we might ultimately still be appealing to seemings, but in the context of this particular debate, right, seems to be the case to you that it's a fact that slavery is wrong. Seems to be the case to me that it's false that it's a fact that slavery is wrong. So now we have a stalemate with respect to those seemings. So the second option is that your opponent has the same seemings as you with respect to what you're debating about. But the thing is that in that case, they are doubting those seemings. Like, that's precisely what they're doing, is that they are presenting some reasons or arguments to challenge those seemings. So, like if we're debating moral realism and you say there seem to be moral facts, and then I agree that there seem to be moral facts, but I deny that there are moral facts. I mean, presumably, right, I'm going to be giving some sort of reason or argument against moral facts. So, it doesn't really seem to move the discussion forward by just insisting that, well, I have these seemings and these seemings justify me in holding this belief. Which, I mean, again, that might even be, let's say phenomenal conservatism is true. Okay, maybe, yeah, okay, then you can have justification. You have a justified belief. But it just doesn't. It's in the context of the discussion. It's just dialectically ineffective. And so, like I said, my point in this is not so much to object to phenomenal conservatism, but just to raise a concern about how it's applied, because it's so often I see phenomenal conservatism being used in debates outside of epistemology. Like in the debate about meta-ethics, for instance. And it's just not clear to me sort of what role it's supposed to play there. I guess that's it. I guess those are my own thoughts on phenomenal conservatism. I hope that made some sort of sense. Thanks for watching.